Right, good morning and welcome to the Vermont Legislature's House Committee on Environment and Energy. This morning, we're going to continue our discussions about the budget with Secretary Julie Moore from the Agency of Natural Resources. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm going to endeavor to share my screen. That no.
It work.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So I have some slides this morning that are focused really for the part of the Secretary's office on climate action, but that also dovetails into our work around civil rights and environmental justice. And then we'll turn it over to Commissioner Beeling, who's prepared to speak to you about the significant one-time initiatives that are in the Department of Environmental Conservation budget. I sort of look at the governor's recommend as having kind of four prongs that reach into the climate space. And we'll talk about each of those. A climate office true up, some proposed one-time funding initiatives, role federal funding plays in this, and then a few words about our civil rights and environmental justice unit. Just by way of context, I think it's important to keep in mind there were really significant climate investments made by the governor and the General Assembly as part of the final FY23 budget that total more than $200 million. There's about $160 million worth of ARPA money that we are working to help deploy between now and the end of calendar year 24, as well as $40 million worth of general fund. And it touches on a lot of different agencies of state government, from the Public Service Department to the Agency of Transportation, the Office of Economic Opportunity within the Department of Children and Families, Department of Buildings and General Services, along with Vermont Emergency Management and ANR. They're in various stages, but this is just to give you a sense for what those dollar figures were that were included as part of the FY23 budget, and make clear we'll need all of the time available to us through the end of calendar year 24 to fully deploy and commit these dollars.
So can I pause there and just ask about the various stages? Because there's certainly been some feedback on getting money out the door concerns. And so what are the various stages of that?
Right. So there's a multi-step process for the ARPA funds in particular, where they need to be reviewed and approved or assigned a risk level by Guidehouse, which is the contractor the Agency of Administration is retained to make sure we're complying with federal Treasury guidance. Several of these initiatives, the expanded weatherization, most notable among them, were determined to be moderate risk, as well as the municipal energy resilience proposal. And so it's risk. So they don't want to tell you absolutely this complies with federal guidance, or nope, you're in complete violation of federal guidance. Instead, they provide feedback to us on risk. This is a low risk activity. It appears to fully comply with federal guidance. This is a moderate risk activity, and explain, modifications we may wish to consider to the program in order to lower the risk level, or leave it as moderate risk, and things that they see as high risk. And high risk would mean ultimately federal auditors may say that was not an eligible expense you charged to these ARPA accounts. We'd like our money back, please.
So have other states run into getting kind of dinged on this and finding them not in compliance?
Not under ARPA, but under past federal funding programs, there have been instances of being dinged for spending money on ineligible projects and programs that were determined ultimately to be ineligible.
Okay, so weatherization is low risk, and so I'm going to let you finish your sentence. I'm assuming that means we get it out the door.
So the part that went through DCF, Office of Economic Opportunity, was low risk. The part that was going through BHFA for middle income Vermonters was determined to be moderate risk. Another example of a moderate risk was the Municipal Energy Resilience Program, where it didn't appear to fully comply with the federal ARPA guidance. In those instances, we've gone through a secondary process to convert these to revenue replacement, which is just we are allowed to assume so much of the work state government did in response to the COVID pandemic wouldn't have been done but for the pandemic. And we're able to essentially treat those money as we're able to reimburse ourselves through ARPA and then direct it into these programs, which gets rid of the need to comply with the Treasury guidance. That said, it's a several month process to sort of work through that. So we've done revenue replacement in places where we thought, where the feedback we received from Guidehouse on our initial program design was that these were moderate or high risk programs. And we're now in the process of putting those dollars on the ground. Many of these initiatives are being run as requests for proposals, where we put out a solicitation and then are reviewing and ranking projects based on the request for funding that we receive. Some of them we are administering directly. Probably the most notable among that is some of the investments in natural and working lands are trying to accelerate adoption of some of the most climate friendly agronomic practices, cover cropping, changes in tillage practices, et cetera. And so that's really a dramatic expansion of work that was being done in service of water quality, and sort of is a double win from my perspective, in that we're gaining climate resilience benefits as well as quality benefits through that work.
Can you tell us on this list that you have, did all of them have to go through the process of kind of rebranding the money, or? So
no, many of them, the weatherization work at the highest level, any program that really can be demonstrated to be in service of low-income Vermonters is broadly eligible for ARPA. So things like low-income weatherization, mitigating flood hazards where we're targeting low-income neighborhoods or communities, providing the electric system upgrades, again, that disproportionately benefit low-income Vermonters are low risk. If it's not a program that's specifically targeting low-risk communities, oftentimes it needed to look at revenue replacement to give ourselves that greater flexibility. Deputy Secretary Farnham is unbelievably conversant in all of this, and would encourage you to potentially hear from him, because it's an art as well as a science, and he is very good at it.
okay. So on this list, though, the expanded weatherization was high risk.
It was broken into two.
Yeah.
So there's I believe it was $35 million of that 80 million was for low income Vermonters and was going to be administered by DCF. 45 million was going to VHFA for moderate middle income Vermonters. The 45 million needed to go through revenue replacement. The 35 million was fully eligible for ARPA under the Treasury guides determined to be low risk.
I was just looking for kind of a high level on the list of.
I can bring that to you. I've also mixed some apples and oranges there, in that some of for example, the EV related funding isn't all ARPA funding. Some of that is it comes out of the $40 million of state general fund that I noted above.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right.
But I was just trying to give a sense that there is an inordinate amount of work going on right now in this space too, and not to lose sight of that. So in terms of the base budget, I'm calling this a part of what's in the FY24 budget is what I would refer to as a climate office true-up. As I'm sure you recall, the Climate Action Office was created in the FY23 budget. It includes 8 positions in total. To date, 4 of those positions are filled. 3 are under recruitment as we speak. And the FY24 budget adjusts base funding to meet actual staff salaries. There was also sort of I think an accounting glitch in the final budget that reduced the climate office budget by $100,000 in FY23, as opposed to our environmental justice budget, which I think was what was intended, but that's also restored in the FY24 budget. So all told, it's about a $280,000 increase in the base budget for the climate office in the ANR budget this year.
Representative Sibilia has a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize, Secretary Moore. On the previous slide,
Sure.
Have we done any analysis on the 80 million in weatherization, and particularly the funding that has been converted to revenue replacement on that availability to the clean heat standard? Should that pass to be used in the credit market? Do we have a sense of limitations on that?
I think that is entirely within the General Assembly's control. The way S5 is currently drafted, it would give credit for it's a date stamp or a time stamp that drives eligibility for clean heat credits. I believe the timestamp in S5 is past Senate Natural was January 1st of this year. So there are some of this work did start last year, but the vast majority, I couldn't say exactly how much of the 80 million, but the vast majority of it would be eligible to earn clean heat credits.
And just one more question. Should the clean heat standard pass and that sizable $80 million in public funds be available to seed that clean heat credit market, what would the effect be on credits?
I think that's a complicated question. I did my own, in the analysis I did, I assumed there was $600 million worth of federal and state incentives or cost share provided. And so to my mind, that $80 million would be part of a larger federal cost share package. We know that we are anticipating, for example, an additional $58 million to help with weatherization coming into the Department of Public Service as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. There are competitive grant programs that we are tracking and will be applying for later this year. So, but in general, it helps reduce the overall costs of the program. So then there are also a series of one-time appropriations related to the climate office. Oh, you want me to go back?
Representative Stebbins.
Good morning. I apologize I'm late. I'll just have to leave it at that. You mentioned environmental justice positions in this slide. Does that sound like climate action office?
It doesn't directly, but there is a strong connection between the work of our environmental justice unit and the work of the climate office. The Just Transitions Committee, in particular, the Climate Council did work that I think is really foundational to the agency's overall approach to environmental justice. And we know that it's going to be sort of a fairly constant need to make sure that those two efforts remain integrated. In addition, as part of the climate office, we have a community engagement and communications coordinator. We also have two environmental justice coordinators who are in the process of hiring that are also, a lot of their work will be community engagement and recognizing that, oftentimes we feel very particular about the information we're trying to take out to the public. The public, on the other hand, sort of looks at the monolith of state government. And so know that we need to be coordinated to make sure that we're speaking with one voice and providing broad-based information that's truly useful to the public. So anticipating that work will proceed in fairly close lockstep as we move forward.
I appreciate the coordination. Thank you. Because I know that the Climate Council spent a lot of time trying to talk through a lot of items related to that environmental justice case, and then we passed an additional law last year. But if I recall correctly, there are 3 positions in that.
In the EJ unit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are those one-time funded, or are they?
There, I actually have a slide on that at the end if you
Okay.
want to wait. But yes, and that there's some challenges which I just want to flag for this committee around that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. In terms of one-time appropriations to the climate office, there are 3, one of which is a $900,000 line item for what I've badged technical analysis tools and training. This is sort of the continued work. The General Assembly has previously appropriated more than $1 million to support this sort of technical analysis work being done by the climate office. Specifically, the tasks that are called out are work related to the thermal sector, our measuring and assessing progress tool, which we are in the process of issuing an RFP for right now, the municipal vulnerability index, which we have a contractor working on right now. This would allow us to do the outreach and engagement to municipalities as the tool is complete to help them apply it and review their own risk. And then developing a cost abatement curve for resilience and adaptation. And this is a first step Representative Sibilia, I think you'd be particularly interested in trying to get us to a better apples to apples comparison between what we know for cost abatement and greenhouse gas mitigation to resilience and adaptation work. So each one of these would likely take the form of an RFP, and we would be looking for contractor support for these services. The next one-time appropriation that's currently shown in the Climate Office, although I think it probably better belongs with the Public Service Department.
Yeah, we have a question.
Sorry, thank you,
Representative.
Secretary Moore. Just on the thermal sector program, can you share with us how that work can complement if we pass S5 or a similar bill this year, how that would help inform?
Absolutely. So what we have the sort of first step in that work that's being done right now. And that is a qualitative evaluation of kind of the entire universe of options for looking at the thermal sector. So it includes a clean heat standard. It includes an all fuels cap and invest, thermal fuels cap and invest, regulatory programs. So work that my agency would do to potentially ban the sale of fossil fuel burning appliances, what it would look like to dramatically expand existing programs like the low income weatherization program, et cetera. That qualitative review has been completed. We've identified 5 scenarios that we're going to evaluate in more detail. This additional funding would allow us to either build out a program design if S5 doesn't come to pass, or look at pieces that might be appended to the edges of S5 for it to pass, including things like expanding some of the existing programs and looking at phasing out the sale of fossil fuel appliances in particular.
So recognizing the time and where we are, I'm extremely interested in the 5. Where would I find them?
I will get that to you. Well, so the Clean Heat Homes program, this is, there's an $8.5 million congressionally directed spending award that was secured by Senator Leahy that will go to the EIC and be administered in partnership with VHFA and Vermont Gas.
So we are having an echo.
All right. And the governor's budget proposes to further expand that by an additional $5 million. The Clean Heat Homes program is a single point program to help Vermonters do whole home climate improvements and couples that with on-bill financing. So we're talking about things like weatherization, clean heat systems, electric panel upgrades, sort of everything that's needed to support that transition to beneficial electrification.
Representative Tory.
Thank you. On the on-bill financing, would that be both Vermont Gas and?
I don't know the answer to that. I can ask and get back to you with a bit more detail.
Yeah, Representative Logan.
Thank you. Does the Clean Heat program, do you know if it includes safety upgrades for things like lead-based paint and asbestos remediation?
It doesn't, unless that's somehow implicated in the weatherization project. I think that
If it does,
within reason. I was going to say the place we see the most nexus between some of the remedial efforts and weatherization is with vermiculite, where if that's the asbestos you're referring to. Yes, that is intended. It is intended that could be dealt with as part of a weatherization project. I know a lot of our weatherization programs right now tend to avoid homes with vermiculite insulation, and we know we've got to get over that hurdle. So,
okay.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I actually have a question on that, like on the weatherization piece. It's not necessarily a budget related question, but since we're talking about it, I'm curious. Someone just said to me something about the weatherization programs potentially promoting like foam without an awareness of the larger greenhouse gas implications of that. Have you heard any of that feedback?
I have not.
Okay, I'll follow up.
Okay.
Fine.
Sure.
Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I really support this. I think it's critical, and I really appreciate you highlighting this. I will say we've been studying how to help Vermonters heat their homes for centuries. I mean, the first time I started in on, I think it was the Thermal Efficiency Task Force in like 2012. And one of the key points was a single point program. So my question is, great that we're seeing this. My question is, do you know how this will flow into the energy coaches that some of the like CVOEOs, like Capstone, are providing? Basically, they're supposed to help folks understand, because for a lot of folks, it's completely overwhelming and confusing. And because of regulatory structures, Efficiency Vermont does this and Green Mountain Power does this. And so, and it's just, it's too much.
It is. I don't know specifically. I had just a very high level conversation with folks from Efficiency Vermont to understand sort of the benefits of a single point program. But I don't know what their exact plans are for dovetailing that with the existing coaches, other than potentially expanding it, because part of this is really trying to get at folks all the way up to who earn less than 120% of MHI. And that's, I think, a more expansive universe than Capstone generally serves.
And can you clarify, are the weatherization agencies, are they 60% and below, or where do they?
I believe it's either 60 or 80%. I'd have to confirm, but it's significantly lower than what's envisioned through this Clean Heat Homes program.
Thank you.
Another one-time appropriation in the governor's budget is $700,000 for refrigerant management. This would allow us to leverage an additional $350,000 of funding that's available through VEIC. And this is to work with about 75 stores, we're estimating. The focus is really going to be on general stores and small convenience stores, not chains, but individually owned, and help those stores phase out their use of refrigerants with high global warming potential. This is anticipated to support things like leak detection systems, actually replacing condensing units, and then working with store owners who own package walk-in units to replace those as well. This is, an overall in our greenhouse gas budget, this is a relatively small sliver. That said, on the sort of per square foot of store basis, these are some really intensive emitters or potential emitters, and the ability to take advantage of funding available to VEIC seemed like a wise opportunity of resources.
Representative Sibilia.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just quickly, what's the outreach for this program that is envisioned?
It will be done through VEIC. They've initiated some of this work. They have a general stores initiative, is my understanding right now. And this is intended to expand upon it. And then finally, back to the environmental justice. So the governor's budget includes funding for environmental justice. Some of it is one-time money and some of it is base. These were all things that we had identified as part of the book of work of environmental justice. There's $300,000 in one-time general fund to provide an additional year of support for the 3 staff positions at ANR. As you may recall, in passing Act 154 last year, the General Assembly sort of transferred or moved our existing EJ coordinator into this particular area of the budget. Added 2 supporting positions, but unfortunately provided only one-time money to pay for those 3 positions. So it's unclear what the intention was. That wasn't the way it had been described to us when we testified on our budget last year. In addition, we had identified significant needs around the translation of vital documents. Believe this work is best suited to the Office of Racial Equity. And so the governor's budget includes $2.3 million to help us as state government catch up in providing translated documents to Vermonters, and then a $700,000 increase in the base general fund to the Office of Racial Equity to continue to support language access on an ongoing basis. I know from my agency's perspective, we've estimated we probably will have about $100,000 a year worth of needs in terms of language access on an ongoing basis, to give you a sense for what the needs may be statewide.
And can you, if you know, give us just a sense so we we understand, like, how many languages are we talking about and how do you select those languages?
So it's the most common language, most prevalent languages that are spoken in Vermont. So they've been identified by the Office of Racial Equity. And what we do, we've also identified a subset of our documents that are determined to be vital and are working to translate them. That said, there is an opportunity for any Vermonter to request translation of a document that we haven't translated on a sort of on-demand or on-call basis.
Is there like a quantification of how you determine what vital is based on like other, like English as their primary language? Maybe those are the documents most looked at, or how do you?
No, John, I don't know if you're able to help answer that question, how we determined what vital is.
Vital documents, there is a definition. We can get that.
Okay, yeah, I don't have that at the tip of my tongue. So we'll get back to you on that.
Representative Logan.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I need to catch up on this because this is my first year in the legislature.
Sure.
I was following the environmental justice bill last year, but not that closely. I'm curious, the EJ positions with ANR, are they solely focused on environmental justice work in their roles?
The coordinator position, which is the position that existed within the agency prior to the passage of Act 154.
Part-time, right?
Well, we had proposed in our budget last year to expand it to full-time. The governor's recommend included that is a civil rights and environmental justice coordinator position. We also have some work we're doing to improve our compliance with the federal civil rights policy. The two additional positions that were included as part of Act 154 are really focused on environmental justice and community engagement and outreach. That said, I become very convinced that the civil rights work is really the foundation for a lot of what we need to do in the environmental justice space. And so I don't think it would be accurate to suggest they won't have any role in our civil rights work at ANR either.
And why would the governor only recommend one-time funds here in this budget?
So this is a tough one. We spent a lot of time with this committee as well as the appropriations committees last year talking about Act 154 and had left the legislature with the impression that that the funding for the staff positions to support implementation of Act 154 would be base funding. That's not the way the budget arrived to us. We received it as we call it a one-time DEPT ID, meaning that is the type of money. And as a result, aren't particularly sure what the legislature's intention was for funding this work and felt like it was a place for conversation. The governor provided one-time money in his budget so that we could go about recruiting the positions as limited service positions that would extend past the current fiscal year. But I think that there is need for a larger conversation about how this work will be funded in perpetuity, because there is a large scope of work, including the other items I've listed here, and no budget provided for it at the current time.
And for new members, this committee recommended that it be in base funding ongoing, just to be clear. So
Yes.
I don't know what happened after I left here, but that was in our recommendation.
There's significant turnover in the appropriations committee this year, right? So it may not be.
Well, I think we can remind them.
And I'm happy to help flesh any of these items out if that would be of use and of interest to the committee.
It will be. Yeah. Representative Logan, we may be interrupted. I don't know.
Oh, right. We're at the line.
Anointed hour.
Right. Really quickly. So is there an additional request for the other costs related to the EJ work?
I'm happy to put one together if that would be of help to you.
It would. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Are there other areas besides what you've presented, and I appreciate the transparency, that are one-time only?
Yeah, so the completing the mapping tool, I would argue, is one time only. The General Assembly appropriated $500,000. Our best estimate is $750,000. That said, we haven't put the RFP out yet to have a firm number for you. And then there's an ongoing cost of maintaining that mapping tool. The advisory, the next two items on the list, I think, are things that are ready for discussion by the General Assembly. The advisory council having facilitation, contracted facilitation support similar to what we had for the climate council, I think is advisable. We have worked with the Vermont Council on Rural Development, who's agreed to facilitate our first advisory council meeting, which I think is scheduled for March 10th. But it puts Carla Ramundi, who's our environmental justice and civil rights coordinator, in a tough position, asking her to both be part of the advisory council and facilitate it, and haven't figured that out yet.
Please, may I have your attention, please? This is an exercise of the Vermont State House lockdown system. This is only an exercise.
We will